I walked into my husband's pregnant mistress's baby shower, set a stack of divorce papers on her gift table in front of 40 guests, and announced exactly who the father really was. The backyard smelled like sugar and cut grass. 40 people stood scattered across Bethany's mother's lawn in Glen Allen, holding mimosas under a banner that read, "Welcome, baby girl," in gold cursive letters. I walked through the side gate like I'd been invited, because in my head, I had been. Grant built this family. I built this family. I just wasn't the one having the baby. Grant saw me first. He was holding a paper plate of deviled eggs, and it hit the grass when his hand went slack. His face drained the color of the tablecloths. "Claire," he said my name like a question, like he wasn't sure it was really me standing there in the sunlight with a manila envelope under my arm. Rhonda stood up so fast, her lawn chair tipped backward into the pitcher of lemonade on the folding table beside her. Ice cubes scattered across the grass. "What is she doing here?" she said, to no one, to everyone, her voice already climbing toward the octave she used when she wanted a room to take her side. I didn't answer her. I walked past both of them, past the row of women I half recognized from Grant's office holiday parties, straight to the gift table piled with pastel boxes and tissue paper shaped like baby elephants. I set the envelope down in the center of it, on top of a box wrapped in yellow polka dots. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "But I brought a gift, too." Bethany was sitting in a white wicker chair at the head of the yard, both hands resting on the round shape of her stomach, 7 months along in a floral dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She looked at me the way you look at a car accident, slow, disbelieving, waiting for someone else to tell her what she was seeing was real. "Those are divorce papers," I told her, loud enough that the whole yard could hear it. "Filed this morning. Grant is still legally my husband, and he will be for exactly as long as it takes my attorney to finish processing them." I looked at Rhonda next. "Thank you for teaching your son how to lie to a woman's face for 3 years. I cried on our bathroom floor after every single negative test. He held me every time. He knew exactly why they kept coming back negative. Someone's phone was already up, recording. I heard it before I saw it. That particular hush that happens when 40 people all inhale at once. "Claire, you need to leave." Rhonda had found her voice again, sharp now, aimed at controlling the room the way she'd controlled every room I'd ever watched her walk into. "This is not the time or the place for whatever this is." "You're right," I said. "It should have happened 2 weeks ago when I found the messages, but I wanted Bethany's guests to hear it from me instead of finding out the way I did." I turned toward the woman I recognized from Grant's office, the one who organized the annual golf outing, standing frozen with a mimosa halfway to her mouth. "Ask him where he was every second Saturday for the last 7 months. Ask him whose ultrasounds he's been at." Bethany's mother stepped forward, a stout woman in a lavender cardigan who I'd never met in my life, her face working through confusion into something closer to horror as she looked between her daughter and Grant. "Bethany, is this true?" Bethany didn't answer her mother. She was looking at me, both hands still pressed flat against the curve of her stomach, and for one strange second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Grant grabbed my wrist. "Claire, please, not here. Let's talk about this." I pulled my arm free hard enough that I knocked a stack of gift bags off the edge of the table. Tissue paper spilled across the grass like confetti nobody wanted. "We're done talking," I said. "I just wanted Bethany's guests to know exactly what kind of family they're throwing a party for." I walked back out through the gate while the yard erupted behind me. Bethany was sobbing. Rhonda was shouting my name across the lawn like it was a curse word. I didn't look back. "I want to tell you how I got there, because none of it happened the way you'd expect. It didn't start with a slammed door or a screaming match. It started with a stack of ordinary paperwork on a kitchen counter, and me, 34 years old, too tired to look at it closely. I met Grant Holloway in the fall of 2016 at a mutual friends fundraiser in downtown Richmond. I was 26 and 2 years into my job as a fraud analyst at Coastal Union Bank, the kind of work where you spend your days finding the one number in 10,000 that doesn't belong. Grant sold commercial real estate. He had an easy laugh and a way of remembering small details about people, the name of your childhood dog, the college you almost transferred to. He asked me on our second date what my parents did for a living, and when I told him my father was a plumber, he didn't flinch the way a few of the men I'd dated before him had. He asked good follow-up questions. He remembered the answers. I found out later that remembering things about people was less a kindness than a tool, a way of building a version of intimacy that cost him almost nothing to maintain. But at 26, it just felt like being seen, and I hadn't been seen like that by anyone in a long time. He proposed on the Belle Isle footbridge in June of 2018, on a Tuesday evening for no reason other than, he said, he didn't want to wait for a special occasion to ask a question he already knew the answer to. I said yes before he'd finished the sentence. I remember thinking, standing there over the water with the ring still cold against my finger, that I'd found the rarest kind of person, one who paid close enough attention to actually know you. It's strange now, knowing what I know, to hold that memory up against everything that came after and try to decide which parts of him were real. I've come to believe most people aren't entirely one thing or the other. Grant loved me in the ways he was capable of loving someone, right up until loving me became more expensive than the alternative. We married in September of 2019 at a vineyard outside Charlottesville. 200 guests, a band that played until midnight, Grant's mother giving a toast that mentioned twice how she'd always pictured him marrying someone a little more traditional. I laughed it off. Everyone laughed with with me. Rhonda Halloway had a gift for saying things that sounded like compliments until you were alone in the car replaying them. Rhonda had been widowed young. Grant's father, Walter Halloway, died of a heart attack when Grant was 19, leaving behind a modest fortune from a chain of hardware stores and a trust fund earmarked very specifically for the education of Walter Halloway's grandchildren. Rhonda talked about that trust the way other people talk about scripture. $250,000 sitting in an account at a firm called Whitfield & Cole, waiting for a baby that would prove, in her words, that the Halloway line was still worth something. She never liked me. Not loudly, not in any way I could point to at a dinner party and call cruelty. It was smaller than that. She'd ask if I was sure I wanted to keep working full-time once we had kids. She'd mention, unprompted, that Grant's college girlfriend had gone on to become a pediatric nurse. So nurturing, that one. At my own bridal shower, she stood up to give a toast and spent most of it talking about how proud Walter would have been of Grant, barely mentioning me at all, and afterward told me privately that she hoped I understood how much responsibility came with marrying into a family like theirs. I told my mother about it that night, over the phone, half laughing, half unsettled. My mother, practical as ever, told me every mother-in-law thinks no one is good enough, and that I shouldn't read too much into it. I wanted to believe her. My parents had been married 36 years by then, a plumber and a school secretary from Mechanicsville, who never once made either of their daughters feel like a disappointment, and I think some part of me assumed all families eventually softened the way mine had. Rhonda never softened. She sharpened. When Grant and I struggled to get pregnant, starting in the spring of 2023, Rhonda's concern arrived dressed as sympathy. She started taking Grant on weekend fishing trips at her lake house in Smith Mountain Lake, just the two of them, so he could clear his head from all the stress. I thanked her for that. I actually thanked her. Standing in my own kitchen, grateful that someone was taking care of my husband while I couldn't take care of myself. I was 31 when we started trying, 34 by the time everything came apart, and somewhere in those 3 years, I watched my own sense of my body curdle from something I trusted into something I interrogated every single month. We started IVF in June of 2023 at Commonwealth Reproductive Health, a clinic on Parham Road with a waiting area full of watercolor paintings of storks that I came to hate with a specific targeted rage. The first round cost $16,200 out of pocket after insurance. We did 6 rounds over 3 years. Every one of them failed. By the time we stopped, we'd spent $91,400, most of it drained from a savings account we'd been building toward a down payment on a house in the Fan District. The kind of neighborhood with wraparound porches and a yard big enough for a swing set. The kind of house we used to drive past on Sunday afternoons and point at like it belonged to us already. Every negative test felt like a small funeral. I'd sit in our bathroom with the little plastic wand on the edge of the sink, waiting the full 3 minutes even after I already knew, because some part of me kept hoping the second line would show up late. Grant held me on the bathroom floor after each one. He was always so gentle about it, so patient. And I told myself I was lucky to have a husband who never once made me feel like the failure was mine alone, even though, somewhere underneath the gratitude, a small, cold part of me kept noticing how easily he comforted me. Like a man reciting lines he already knew by heart. He'd rub circles on my back and say the same soft things every time. It's not your fault, we'll try again. I love you no matter what happens. And I remember thinking more than once how strange it was that grief this specific could sound so rehearsed coming out of someone who loved me. I told myself grief just looks different on different people. I didn't yet understand that some people can comfort you flawlessly precisely because they already know exactly how the story ends. There was a moment back in the fall of 2024 after our second failed round that I didn't think much of at the time. I was carrying out the recycling and found a torn envelope from Commonwealth Reproductive Health, addressed only to Grant. Not to us, not to the household, just his name in the little plastic window. I asked him about it in the kitchen while I was rinsing out yogurt containers. It's nothing, he said, not looking up from his phone. Insurance sends duplicate paperwork constantly. I think it's just a billing statement. Why would they send you something separate from me? I don't know, Claire. Probably a clerical thing. You want me to call and yell at them about junk mail? He smiled when he said it, the kind of smile that made the question sound small, made me feel small for asking it. I let it go. I had a follow-up appointment the next morning and a headache from the hormone injections and exactly 0 bandwidth left over to interrogate an envelope. I threw it away. I didn't think about it again for almost 2 years. That was the shape of our marriage before it broke. Grant was attentive in the ways that were visible and absent in the ways that weren't. Rhonda hovered at the edges, offering help that always seemed to cost me something. And I kept telling myself that a good marriage meant giving people the benefit of the doubt, that suspicion was its own kind of poison, that if I just held on and trusted him a little longer, the treatments would work and all of it would resolve into the life we'd planned. I didn't know yet that I was building a case for a defense attorney who'd already picked a side. I just knew I was tired and in love and determined not to become the kind of wife who checked her husband's phone. I want to be honest about something else too, because this story isn't one where I get to stand entirely clean. I noticed things, small things, a coworker's name that came up too often, a late night text that made Grant tilt his phone away from me on the couch, just an inch, just enough. I noticed, and then I talked myself out of noticing, because the alternative was too large to hold, while I was also grieving 6 rounds of failed treatment. I want you to understand that before you judge how long it took me to see what was happening. Sometimes you don't miss the signs. You see them and decide decide, consciously, that surviving the day in front of you matters more than solving the puzzle they're forming. The escalation started slow, the way a ceiling crack starts slow, and I want to walk you through it, because every single step of it felt survivable at the time. It's only from here, looking backward, that I can see the shape of the whole staircase. The first step was the fishing trips becoming permanent fixtures. What started as one weekend in April of 2023 became a standing arrangement. The second Saturday of every month, Rhonda and Grant driving out to Smith Mountain Lake, while I stayed home to rest after whatever procedure the calendar had scheduled that week. I asked Grant once if I could come along, thinking fresh air might do me good. He said Rhonda had specifically asked for time alone with him, that she was worried about him carrying so much emotional weight for my sake, and didn't I want him to have an outlet so he could keep showing up for me? I just miss you, I told him. The night before one of those trips, folding laundry on our bed while he packed a duffel bag. It feels like I only see you on the weeks you're recovering from seeing your mother. That's not fair, he said. I'm doing this so I can be a better husband to you. Do you know how hard it is watching you go through this every month? I need somewhere to put that. He zipped the bag and kissed my forehead like the conversation was finished. I remember agreeing. I remember thinking it sounded reasonable, generous even, a man taking care of his own grief so he could keep showing up for mine. It took me a long time to recognize that a wife being gently, politely excluded from her own husband's life, one weekend at a time, is not the same thing as a wife being supported. It's just exclusion with better manners. The second step came at Thanksgiving in 2024, 6 months after our fourth failed round. We were at Rhonda's house in Midlothian, the whole extended family around a table that seated 14, and Rhonda had one too many glasses of Chardonnay and started talking about legacy. She brought out an old family Bible with blank pages in the back for recording births, and she set it in front of Grant like a ceremonial object. Some women just aren't built for this, she said, looking directly at me while she said it, her voice pitched soft and sympathetic like she was doing me a kindness. There's no shame in that, Claire, truly. But you should know it's all right to step aside so Grant can have what he wants out of life. Nobody would think less of you. The table went silent. Even Grant's uncle stopped chewing. I looked at Grant, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend the 3 years of injections and blood draws and hormone crashes I'd put my body through for us, for this family, for a Bible with blank pages his mother wanted filled with the right kind of grandchild. He patted my hand under the table instead and said quietly, "She's just worried about me, Claire. You know how she gets." Not a defense. A translation service for his mother's cruelty, aimed at making it more palatable for me to swallow. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub until I could breathe normally again. Through the door, I could hear the dinner conversation resume, forks against china, someone asking Rhonda to pass the gravy, life continuing on the other side of the wall like nothing had happened at all. When I came back out, I told myself it was one bad night, one glass of wine too many, not a preview of anything. I want to be honest that I also told myself something uglier, that maybe if I just endured it gracefully enough, Rhonda would eventually see something in me worth respecting. I spent a lot of years trying to earn the approval of a woman who'd already decided, long before I arrived, exactly how this story was supposed to end. I called Lauren from the car on the drive home that night, and she was the one who finally said out loud what I'd been avoiding. "That's not a mother-in-law being blunt, Claire. That's cruelty with a bow on it. You know that, right?" I told her I knew. I don't think I fully believed myself when I said it. It's a strange thing, recognizing cruelty in the moment and still needing someone else to say the word out loud before you're willing to let yourself feel the full weight of it. The third step was Bethany. She'd worked in Grant's office for 2 years by then, a marketing coordinator who organized the holiday party and always remembered to save Grant a plate. I met her exactly once, at that same holiday party in December of 2024, and she mentioned in passing a personal trainer she saw 3 mornings a week at a gym called Ironclad on Broad Street, someone named Chase who apparently had her doing deadlifts at 6 in the morning. She laughed about it, said he was relentless, said her legs hadn't forgiven her yet. I didn't think about that detail again for over a year. Around February of 2025, the late-night texts started, Grant's phone lighting up on the nightstand at 11, at midnight, his face illuminated by the glow while he typed back with a focus he never brought to our own conversations anymore. Grant said it was work stress, a difficult client account Bethany was helping him manage. When I raised it gently over dinner one night in March, he didn't get angry. He got wounded, which was worse. "You're being paranoid," he said, setting his fork down like I'd insulted him. "I know the treatments have you strung out, Claire, but this is exactly the kind of stress your doctor told you to avoid. Bethany is a friend. That's it. I need you to trust me right now, more than ever." He said it so calmly, so reasonably, with such wounded patience, that I found myself reaching across the table to apologize to him. I apologized for noticing something true. I remember that dinner clearly. Chicken piccata I'd made from a recipe his mother had given me years earlier, the kind of small domestic irony I only recognized much later. I saw Bethany again at Grant's company summer picnic in June of 2025, 7 months before I'd learned anything real. She hugged me hello, asked how the treatments were going with a softness that felt genuine at the time, and told me she hoped it worked out for us soon. I thanked her. I remember thinking she seemed sweet, a little quiet, the kind of coworker who probably got along with everyone because she never gave anyone a reason not to like her. She was drinking sparkling water instead of the wine everyone else had, and when I asked if she was doing a dry summer, she laughed a little too fast and said something about training for a half marathon. I believed believed her completely. She was already 9 weeks pregnant by then, though I wouldn't do that math until much later. Sitting on my kitchen floor with a tablet in my lap, counting backward through months I'd spent injecting myself with hormones for a baby that was never going to exist. The fourth step was money. In the spring of 2025, after round 5 failed, small amounts started disappearing from our joint savings. $200 here for a guy's trip to a cabin he never named. $400 there to help Rhonda with a medical bill she never named either. I was 3 days out from a 5th failed embryo transfer when I noticed the first transfer, staring at the banking app on my phone in a fog of exhaustion and grief, and I was too gutted to audit it properly. I did ask him about one of them, a $300 withdrawal in April with no memo attached at all. What was the cash withdrawal for? I asked, not accusing, just tired, scrolling through the statement at the kitchen table. Poker night with the guys from the office, he said, not looking up from unloading the dishwasher. I told you about that. He hadn't. I let it go anyway because I genuinely couldn't remember most conversations from that stretch of my life with any confidence, lost as I was in a fog of hormone injections and disappointment. I told myself I trusted him with money the way I trusted him with everything else. I didn't yet know that the person you trust with everything else is also the person best positioned to move $900 a month toward an apartment on Carey Street without you ever thinking to check, or that a fraud analyst who catches strangers hiding money for a living could still miss it entirely when the stranger was sleeping in her own bed. The 5th step was a conversation I still think about more than any other, because it was the one where Grant came the closest to telling me the truth and chose not to. It was late May of 2025, after round 5, and I'd asked him, point blank, sitting on the edge of our bed at midnight, whether there was something he wasn't telling me about why none of this was working. He went very still for a moment, longer than a moment, long enough that I actually thought he might answer honestly. He looked at me in the low light of the bedroom lamp, and for a second I thought I saw something shift behind his eyes, a door opening a crack before he decided, deliberately, to close it again. There's nothing wrong on my end, he finally said. The doctors would have told us if there was. It's just bad luck, Claire. It happens to good people. I believed him, because I had no reason not to, and because Dr. Aldana at Commonwealth had told us, in the same breath as delivering our 4th negative result, that unexplained infertility accounted for a meaningful percentage of cases like ours. I didn't know yet that "there's nothing wrong on my end" was, technically, a sentence he could tell himself was true, since motility problems aren't the same diagnosis as the ones the clinic had screened for in our earliest workup. I've turned that sentence over so many times since. It's the kind of lie that survives on a technicality. The 6th step was the one that finally broke through the ceiling for good. In April of 2026, after our 6th and final round failed, I told Grant I needed a break, that my body couldn't survive another cycle and neither could my heart. He pushed back harder than I expected, said we'd come too far to stop now, said Rhonda's trust was sitting there waiting, and it would be a waste to give up when we were so close. We're not quitting now, he said, and there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard directed at me before, something closer to panic than persuasion. You don't understand what's riding on this, Claire. I remember thinking it was strange, how much more invested he seemed in the outcome than I was starting to feel, how the word riding sounded less like hope and more like a debt coming due. I didn't understand yet what he already knew. I agreed to think about a 7th round. I never got the chance to decide. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show, linked in the description, for early access to new stories in better audio quality. Now back to the video. The truth found me 2 weeks before that baby shower, on a Tuesday afternoon in July, because Grant left his tablet charging on the kitchen counter, and I grabbed it to check the weather before my shift at the bank. It opened straight into a messaging app I didn't recognize, mid-conversation, with a contact saved simply as B. The last message on the screen asked if I still had no idea about the due date. My hands went cold in a way I can still feel if I think about it too hard. I scrolled up for almost an hour, sitting on our kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, the tile leaching the warmth out of me while I read. Bethany wasn't just pregnant. She was 7 months along. Grant had been at every single one of her appointments. The 12-week scan, the anatomy scan, the glucose test, all scheduled on the same second Saturdays that Rhonda claimed were reserved for fishing. I found the receipts for 2 of those appointments in a shared calendar buried 3 folders deep, labeled only SML, the same abbreviation Grant used for Smith Mountain Lake, a detail so small and so deliberate that it made me feel sick in a new, specific way. He hadn't just lied. He'd built a filing system for the lie. Rhonda was in the thread too, coordinating nursery paint colors, sending links to cribs from a boutique in Short Pump, telling Bethany she was finally going to get a real grandchild worth spoiling. There was a message from Rhonda, sent in May, that I read 4 times before I could make myself believe it. Claire's treatments keep her so distracted these days. She won't notice a thing. Let her tire herself out. I sat with that sentence longer than any of the others, not because it was the cruelest thing she'd ever said about me, but because it was the most honest. For 3 years, my exhaustion hadn't been an unfortunate side effect of loving my husband. It had been useful to them. It had been, in Rhonda's own words, part of the plan. I don't remember standing up off that floor. I remember at some point being in the bathroom, running the tap to splash cold water on my face, staring at a woman in the mirror who looked exactly the same as she had that morning. Same ponytail, same freckles across her nose, same wedding ring, and thinking how strange it was that a person could look entirely unchanged on the outside while something this large rearranged arranged itself underneath. I sat on that floor and I cried until the sadness curdled into something colder and much more useful. Then I did what 3 years of hunting fraud for a living had trained me to do. I documented everything. I screenshotted every message, every date, every ultrasound photo Bethany had sent him, time-stamped and organized into a folder on my personal phone. I forwarded copies to my work email, then to a personal cloud account Grant didn't know existed. I wiped the search history on the tablet and put it back exactly where I'd found it, angled the same 6 degrees against the charging cord. Then I smiled through dinner. Grant asked if I was feeling all right. I told him I was just tired from work. It wasn't even a lie. The next morning, I called Dana Ferris, the sharpest family attorney in Richmond, a woman I'd worked alongside twice on bank fraud cases that crossed into divorce litigation. I sat in her office on Franklin Street and slid my phone across the desk, and I watched her scroll through 2 years of evidence with the flat, professional face of someone who had seen worse and would see worse again. Dana Ferris had a corner office on the 4th floor with a view of the James River, and a way of listening that made you feel like she'd already seen your exact situation 100 times before and knew precisely how it ended. I'd worked 2 joint cases with her years earlier, when a business dissolution I was auditing turned out to be tangled up in a messy divorce, and I remembered thinking at the time that I never wanted to need a lawyer like her. Sitting across from her desk with my own marriage laid out in screenshots, I was grateful I'd remembered her name. "You have more than enough for an immediate no-fault divorce," Dana told me, scrolling through what I'd forwarded with the same clinical patience I recognized from my own work. "But Claire, look at this." She turned the phone toward me at a string of Venmo transfers I hadn't fully processed yet, small amounts every few weeks for the better part of a year, all routed to an account under Bethany's name with memo lines like rent help and furniture. "He's been funneling marital money into her apartment for months. This isn't just infidelity. This is financial waste of marital assets, and it strengthens your claim on everything. The house, the retirement accounts, all of it." "How long do I have to wait to file?" I asked. "You don't have to wait at all," she said, "but you should think about timing. Filing quietly gives him no chance to move assets before we've frozen what we can freeze. You said there's a baby shower coming up?" I nodded. Dana tapped her pen against the desk once, twice, considering something. "Then I'd have the papers finalized and filed the same morning if I were you. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do with the truth is choose exactly when it lands." I didn't tell her what I was already planning to do with that timing. I don't think I fully admitted it to myself yet either. I spent the next 2 weeks playing the perfect exhausted wife. I rehearsed my calm voice in the bathroom mirror every morning before work, practiced keeping my face neutral when Grant mentioned another upcoming fishing trip. Dana built my case in total silence on the other end, filing the paperwork, freezing what she could freeze, preparing everything for the moment I decided to move. I told no one. Not my sister Lauren, not my closest friend from the bank, not a single person who might accidentally let something slip before I was ready. Lauren called twice that week, sensing something in my voice was off, and both times I told her I was just tired from a hard stretch at work. I've apologized to her since for that lie. She told me she understood completely, that she would have done the exact same thing in my position, and that the only thing that stung even a little was not being trusted with it sooner. I think that's a fair thing to still be a little sad about. Keeping a secret that large, even for good reason, costs you something with the people who love you, even when they forgive you for it. I found out about the shower through a group chat Rhonda had accidentally added me to years earlier, back when we still pretended to like each other and had simply forgotten to remove me from. 40 guests, Saturday. Bethany's mother's backyard in Glen Allen. Gifts requested from a registry at a boutique baby store downtown. I wasn't invited. That detail didn't matter to me at all. I filed the divorce papers with Dana at 9 that morning. By 11, I was standing at the side gate of a stranger's backyard, envelope under my arm, walking toward the version of myself I didn't know I had in me until I needed her. You already know what happened next. What you don't know is what happened after I drove away. One of the videos from the shower made it onto a local Richmond community page within a day. 30 seconds of me setting the envelope down and speaking my piece, captioned by whoever posted it with something like, "This really happened at a baby shower in Glen Allen today." By Sunday, it had thousands of views and a comment section full of strangers debating whether I'd been justified or unhinged, a debate I never once participated in. Though Lauren screenshotted a few of the kinder comments and sent them to me without any explanation, which I understood as her own quiet way of telling me she was proud of me before I'd told her anything at all. I checked into a Hampton Inn 20 minutes outside the city because I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping in our house that night, in a bed that suddenly felt like evidence. My phone had 42 missed calls by the time I finally looked at it, most of them from Grant, a handful from Rhonda, and one single text from Bethany that said only, "We need to talk." I ignored every one of them. I called the bank instead and closed our joint checking account before it hit 5 o'clock, leaving Grant exactly $411 and a stack of unpaid credit card statements he'd have to explain to someone who wasn't me anymore. Then, about 20 minutes after I'd finally set my phone down on the nightstand, a message came through from a number I didn't recognize. 3 words, no name attached. It's not his. Before I could even process what that meant, the same number called me directly, the screen glowing bright against the dark motel ceiling. My thumb hovered over the answer button while my heart slammed hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I answered on the 4th ring. "Claire?" The voice was female, younger, her, familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. It's Marissa. Marissa Holloway, Grant's cousin. Please don't hang up. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for 2 weeks, and I couldn't just let it go another day. I sat up against the headboard, my whole body suddenly very still. Tell me what, Marissa? I work as a paralegal at Whitfield & Cole, the trust firm. I process the Holloway family trust filings. She took a breath I could hear all the way through the phone. There's a release condition on Walter's education trust, the $250,000 his dad set up. It only unlocks when there's what the document calls a natural-born grandchild of the Holloway bloodline, and the firm requires a paternity affidavit before we can process a claim that large. Rhonda submitted a request 2 weeks ago, wanting to start the paperwork before the baby was even born, so the funds would be ready. Standard procedure meant ordering a prenatal paternity test through the lab we work with. My mouth had gone completely dry, and it excluded Grant. Marissa's voice cracked slightly on the second word. The results came back 4 days ago. Rhonda has known since Tuesday. She sat on it. She didn't tell Bethany. She didn't tell Grant. She was going to let the shower happen anyway, let everyone believe what they already believed, and figure out how to handle the trust paperwork after the baby was born, when it would be harder for anyone to ask questions. I closed my eyes. Then whose is it? There's a name on the lab intake form as a comparison sample Bethany requested privately months ago, before any of this became official. A man named Chase Whitmore. I looked him up. He's a personal trainer at a gym on Broad Street. Marissa let that sit for a second before she kept going, more gently now, like she knew the next part would hurt worse than the first. Claire, there's something else. Something I found while I was pulling Grant's old paperwork for the trust file last month, before I even knew what Rhonda was planning to do with the test results. There's a medical form in there from Commonwealth Reproductive Health from October of 2024, a semen analysis. It's Grant's. The results show severely reduced motility, the kind of number that makes natural conception close to impossible without significant intervention. He never told anyone in the family. I don't think he told you either. I just thought, given everything, you deserved to actually know. I didn't say anything for a long moment. 24 months, 2 rounds of failed IVF at the time, 4 more still ahead of us, $91,000, and he had known, since that torn envelope I found in the recycling bin 2 years earlier and let go without a fight, exactly what the real obstacle was. He'd let me carry that weight alone every single time. He'd let his own mother suggest, at a Thanksgiving table, that I step aside for a problem that was never mine to solve. I thought about every injection I'd given myself in the bathroom at work, because the timing didn't allow for waiting until I got home. I thought about the scar tissue on my stomach from 6 years of needles, tissue that would be there for the rest of my life, marking a war I hadn't known I was fighting alone. I sat there in the dark for a moment before I could make myself ask the next question, the one that mattered more than any of the others. Does he know you're telling me this? I asked. No, Marissa said. And honestly, I don't care if he finds out I did. I've spent my whole life watching Rhonda decide what everyone in this family is allowed to know, and I'm tired of being one more person who goes along with it because it's easier than the alternative. You were always kind to me at holidays, Claire, even when everyone else in that house treated me like the poor relation who did the family's paperwork for free. I couldn't sit on this. Thank you for telling me, I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. Truly, Marissa, thank you. I've watched Rhonda control this family for 15 years, she said. I'm done being quiet about it too. For what it's worth, I don't think Grant is half as calculated as his mother is. I think he's a man who got in too deep and didn't know how to climb back out without losing everything. That doesn't make it right. It just might make it easier to understand eventually if you ever want to. I told her I appreciated that, though I wasn't sure yet whether I'd ever want to understand Grant's side of it at all. Some things don't need understanding. They just need to end. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my laptop open on the motel bed and pulled up the joint insurance portal Dana had asked me to audit for the divorce disclosure, the kind of full financial accounting I did professionally for a living, the kind of work that finds the one line item that doesn't belong. It took me 11 minutes to find it myself, an explanation of benefits from October 2024, a semen analysis billed under Grant's name, a diagnosis code I recognized from cases I'd reviewed years earlier at the bank when a client tried to hide a paternity dispute inside a business dissolution. Severe oligoasthenospermia. He hadn't hidden it especially well. He'd simply counted on me never having a reason to look. Rhonda called an emergency family meeting 4 days after the shower at her house in Midlothian, ostensibly to get everyone on the same page before the baby arrived, though what she actually wanted was an audience willing to make me the villain of a story she was still trying to write. Grant's siblings came. His aunt and uncle from Lynchburg drove in. Even Bethany showed up, pale and quiet, sitting apart from the family like she already sensed the ground shifting beneath her. I came too. Dana had advised against it, told me the paperwork alone would do the work without me having to stand in a room and watch it land. I went anyway, with the printed EOB in a folder, and Marissa's information written out in my own handwriting, because some conversations deserve to happen with witnesses, and because I'd spent 3 years being managed by people who assumed I'd always choose the quiet option. I wanted just once to choose the loud one on purpose. Rhonda started before I'd even sat down, launching into a speech about family, about forgiveness, about how mistakes happen but blood is blood, her eyes flicking toward me every few sentences like she was daring me to interrupt. I let her finish. I let her get all the way to the part where she said she hoped we could move forward as a family for the baby's sake. Then Then I set the folder on her dining table, the same table where she'd once told me some women just aren't built for children. Before anyone forgives anyone, I said, everyone in this room should know the baby isn't Grant's. The paternity test came back 4 days ago. Rhonda has known since Tuesday and decided not to tell any of you because she wanted the trust paperwork ready before anyone had time to ask questions. The room went very quiet. Bethany made a small, strangled sound and put both hands over her mouth, her chair scraping backward against the hardwood. That's not— How do you even know that? Ask your future sister-in-law, I said, nodding toward the doorway where Marissa stood, arms crossed, having come at my request. She processed the paperwork herself. Grant turned to his mother, his face doing something I'd never seen it do before, a kind of collapse, all the practiced calm falling away at once. Mom, is that true? Rhonda's jaw worked for a second before anything came out. I was handling it, she said, too fast, too high, her hand gripping the back of a chair like it might hold her upright. I was going to tell you both after the baby was born, once we knew for certain how to what? Grant's voice cracked. How to keep lying. How long were you going to let me think I was a father? I was protecting this family, Rhonda said. And even then, even cornered, there was something in her tone that still expected the room to agree with her. Do you have any idea what it would have meant for that money to just sit there forever, Grant? For your father's legacy to mean nothing because nobody in this family could give him a real grandchild? His uncle, a quiet man I'd only ever heard speak about fishing and the Richmond flying squirrels, finally said something. Rhonda, that money was never worth more than your own son. I wasn't finished. I looked at Grant directly, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself say the thing I'd swallowed at every negative test, every needle, every Thanksgiving table. You knew you had a fertility problem since October of 2024. I found the paperwork myself last night, going through our insurance records for the divorce. You let me believe for 2 more years that whatever was wrong was something wrong with me. You let your mother suggest I step aside so you could have children with someone else, and you sat there and let her say it because some part of you already knew you'd need somewhere else to go. Claire, Grant started, but nothing followed the word. He just sat there, hands pressed flat against his knees, and said nothing else, while his aunt from Lynchburg stood up and walked out of the room without a word, and his younger brother put a hand on my shoulder on his way to follow her. Bethany was crying openly now, not for Rhonda, not for Grant, but in the particular way you cry when you realize you've been a pawn in someone else's plan for longer than you knew. I need you to say it, I told Grant, my voice quiet now, steadier than anything else in the room. Not to your mother, to me. Say that you knew. He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his face finally gave way entirely. I knew, he said. I'm sorry, Claire. I knew, and I let you go through all of it anyway. It wasn't the apology I'd imagined getting, back when I used to imagine confrontations like this one in the shower at 6 in the morning before work, but it was the truth finally, spoken out loud in front of the people who'd helped him hide it, and for the moment that was enough. The aftermath spread out faster than I expected. Bethany moved out of Rhonda's orbit within a week, cutting off contact with the whole family, though she reached out to me once, a short message that just said, I'm sorry, I didn't know about the letter either, and I believed her. I heard through Marissa months later that Bethany moved back in with her mother in Glen Allen and was raising the baby, a girl she named June, largely on her own. Chase Whitmore, as far as I know, was never contacted by anyone but Marissa, who told me he'd had no idea he might be a father until the lab results forced the question into the open, and that he'd since stepped forward and started paying child support without being asked. I never learned much more than that, and I never went looking. Some threads of a story aren't yours to keep pulling. Grant's siblings split down a line I hadn't expected. His brother Wes started calling me every week or so, just to check in, an unexpected kindness from a man I'd always assumed was too loyal to his mother to ever cross her. We got coffee once, about 6 weeks after everything unraveled, and he told me he'd known about Rhonda's favoritism his whole life, had watched her run 3 failed relationships for 2 of her own children through sheer force of manipulation, and had simply never had a reason strong enough to say something out loud until he watched her do it to me in front of the whole family. I should have warned you a long time ago, he said. I told myself it wasn't my business. I was wrong about that. His younger sister sided with Rhonda entirely, blocked my number, and posted something vague and accusatory online about people who destroy families for attention that a mutual friend screenshotted and sent to me out of concern I never asked for. I didn't respond to it. There didn't seem to be a version of a response that would have changed her mind, and I'd stopped needing her to have one. Rhonda made 2 desperate final moves in the weeks after that meeting. The first was legal. She tried to have the family attorney freeze the trust entirely, arguing that without a confirmed Holloway grandchild, the funds should revert to a discretionary account she controlled, a maneuver Marissa flagged to Dana within hours because it would have violated the terms of the original document. The firm's senior partner, a man who had known Walter Holloway personally, apparently told Rhonda in no uncertain terms that the trust would remain exactly where it was until an actual qualifying grandchild existed, and that repeated attempts to circumvent the document would result in the firm declining to represent the family further. It didn't work. The trust sat locked, exactly where it belonged, gathering dust the way it always should have. The second move was personal. Rhonda called me directly, 3 weeks after the family meeting, and offered, without a hint of irony, to pay for a portion of my divorce settlement out of her own accounts if I would sign something agreeing never to discuss the paternity test or the trust attempt publicly again. This doesn't have have to define the family, Claire," she told me, her voice honeyed in the exact way it had been the day she toasted my bridal shower and forgot to mention me. We could all move forward with a little grace. I let Dana handle that call. Dana's exact words, relayed back to me afterward, were that Rhonda could keep her money and her silence both, and that any further contact should go through counsel. Grant tried once to salvage something. He showed up at Coastal Union Bank on a Thursday afternoon, waited in the lobby until my supervisor came to get me, and asked if we could talk somewhere private. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity about what he thought there was left to say. We sat in an empty conference room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and he told me he was sorry, that he'd been a coward, that he never meant for any of it to go as far as it did. He said Bethany had told him about the pregnancy back in January, and that by the time he found out the timeline made him assume it was his, he'd already been in too deep with the lie of the fishing trips to find a way out that didn't cost him everything at once. I told myself I'd figure it out eventually, he said. I just kept moving the deadline. I believed the apology was real. In the narrow way apologies can be real without being enough. I told him I appreciated it. I told him it changed nothing about the paperwork already moving through the courts. He asked quietly if there was any chance, given everything, given the baby not even being his after all, that we could try again someday. I said no. I meant it the way you mean something you've thought about carefully and already grieved. You didn't just cheat on me, Grant, I told him. You let me believe my own body was broken for 2 years when you already knew it wasn't the problem. I don't think there's a version of us that survives that, even if I wanted there to be. Word got around the bank eventually, the way it does in any office. A coworker's cousin having seen the video before anyone realized it was connected to me. My supervisor pulled me into her office one afternoon, not to reprimand me, but to ask gently if I needed any time off. I told her I didn't, that the work was actually helping, that there was something steadying about spending 8 hours a day finding the one number that didn't belong when my personal life had spent 3 years hiding exactly that kind of number from me. She let me keep my caseload. A few coworkers I barely knew started saying hello to me in the break room with a new kind of warmth, the specific warmth people extend to someone they've decided, privately, was in the right. There was a mediation session in early October, required before the final hearing, where Grant's attorney tried to argue that the Venmo transfers to Bethany's apartment should be characterized as gifts rather than marital waste, a distinction that would have meant I couldn't claim an offset. Dana walked in with 12 months of transaction records I'd compiled myself, the memo lines, the dates that lined up exactly with the fertility calendar, and the argument fell apart within 20 minutes. Grant's attorney didn't bring it up again. There was a night, about a month after the shower, when the grief caught up to me in a way the anger hadn't allowed. I was in my new apartment on Meadow Street, unpacking a box of kitchen things, and I found the ultrasound photo from our very first failed round, the one I'd kept folded in an old planner without meaning to. I sat on the kitchen floor of a place that was only mine and cried for the version of Grant I fell in love with at that fundraiser in 2016, the one who remembered small details about people because he actually wanted to know them. I don't know if that version of him was ever entirely real, or if he became someone else somewhere along the way, or if I simply stopped being able to see the difference. I let myself mourn that uncertainty. Some things you lose don't come with clean edges. My sister Lauren came over that same week unannounced, with a bag of takeout and a bottle of wine, and sat on the floor with me while I finished unpacking the box. She didn't ask me to talk about it. She just handed me things to put away, one at a time, and let the silence between us do the part that words couldn't. Rhonda's lake house sold quietly the following spring, a detail Wes mentioned almost in passing during one of our coffee catch-ups, and I felt nothing when I heard it. No satisfaction, no lingering anger, just the flat acknowledgement of one more piece of that old life settling into its final shape without me. Grant moved his things out of the house in late September. On a Saturday, I made sure to spend at Lauren's apartment so I wouldn't have to watch it happen. He left the key on the kitchen counter, in the exact spot where his tablet had been charging the day everything unraveled, which felt like either an accident or a small cruelty, and I never asked him which. When I came home that evening, the house was quieter in a way that had nothing to do with square footage. His side of the closet was empty. The garage held 2 fewer boxes of fishing gear. I walked through every room once, slowly, cataloging what was gone the way I might have audited a set of financial statements, methodical, unemotional, until I got to the nursery we'd never finished decorating, the one room we'd both silently agreed, over 3 years, not to paint, not to furnish, not to jinx by hoping too visibly. I stood in that empty room for a long time. Then I closed the door and didn't go back in until I hired someone 3 months later to turn it into an office. The divorce finalized in November, faster than either of us expected, mostly because Dana's financial disclosure audit uncovered enough misuse of marital funds that Grant's own attorney advised him to settle rather than fight. I kept the house, appraised that fall at just under $400,000, the mortgage now entirely mine to carry alone, which felt less like a burden and more like a decision I'd finally gotten to make without anyone else's name attached to it. I kept my retirement accounts intact, plus a portion of his to offset the $11,000 he'd funneled toward Bethany's apartment over the better part of a year. I didn't ask for anything from the trust, because it was never mine to want, and because some part of me understood that walking away from that money entirely was its own kind of statement, one Rhonda would understand better than any speech I could have given her. When the final papers were signed, I sat in Dana's office and felt, for the first time in months, something something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief, but sat somewhere honestly in between the two. It's been almost 9 months now since I set that envelope down on a stranger's gift table. I still work at Coastal Union Bank, still spend my days finding the one number that doesn't belong in a column of 10,000, and I've come to appreciate the irony of that, given how long it took me to apply the same instinct to my own life. I got a small promotion in the spring, senior fraud analyst, the kind of title I used to imagine mattering more once I had a family to bring it home to. It turns out it matters plenty on its own. My sister Lauren and I have Sunday dinner together most weeks now, something we let slip during the years I was consumed by treatments and appointments, and a marriage that was quietly dissolving without my knowledge. We cook together now, badly, trading off recipes neither of us finishes correctly, and I've started to understand how much of myself I put away during those 3 years without noticing the shelf I put it on. Wes still calls sometimes, checking in, and I've come to think of him as the one piece of that family worth keeping. I haven't spoken to Rhonda since the mediation. I don't expect to again, and I've made a kind of peace with that particular silence. I started therapy in December, mostly at Dana's gentle insistence, and I've spent a lot of those sessions untangling the difference between patience and self-erasure, a distinction I apparently needed a stranger with a notepad to help me draw. My therapist asked me once, early on, what I thought I'd have done differently if I'd opened that torn envelope in 2024 instead of throwing it away. I told her the honest answer, which is that I'm not sure I would have believed what it said, even if I'd read every word. Some truths only become visible once you've already lost enough to be ready for them. She also asked me more recently whether I regretted the shower itself, the theater of it, the 40 strangers and the recorded video, and the manila envelope set down like a gauntlet on someone else's gift table. I told her no without having to think about it. I'd spent 3 years being quiet in rooms where quiet cost me something every single time. Walking into that backyard was the first time in a long while that I decided, on my own terms, exactly how loud a moment was allowed to be. I don't know what happened to Bethany's baby beyond the little Marissa tells me, or whether Rhonda ever found some other grandchild to pin the trust to, some cousin's future child who might one day fill in the blank pages of that family Bible. I don't think about it as often as I expected to. What I think about instead is that torn envelope from 2024, the one I let go without a fight because I was too tired to ask a second question. I think about how much of what happened to me could have been stopped 2 years earlier, if I'd trusted my own instincts instead of trusting his explanation for why they didn't matter. I've had to make peace with the fact that I'll never fully know, and that peace, when it comes to grief like this, doesn't always look like resolution. Sometimes it just looks like deciding to stop asking a question that has no answer left to give you. I think too about the woman who walked through that side gate in Glen Allen with an envelope under her arm, steady enough to speak in front of 40 strangers, and I still don't entirely recognize her as the same person who used to apologize for noticing her own husband's lies. I think 3 years of small cumulative erasures built her without my permission, the way scar tissue builds, useful and unglamorous and entirely necessary by the time you finally need it. I walked into that backyard to end a marriage I already knew was over. What I didn't understand yet was that I was also walking out of a lie that had been quietly forming around me for 3 years. One appointment, one envelope, one fishing trip at a time. I got my peace. I got my own name back on the mailbox, my own quiet kitchen, Sunday dinners that don't require rehearsing a calm voice in the mirror beforehand. But peace isn't the same thing as an ending without loss. Something real was taken from me in those 3 years, time I can't get back. Trust I don't think I'll ever hand over quite so easily again. I've made room for both of those truths at once. I'm at peace, and I'm still, some nights, grieving a version of a life I thought I was building. I've learned that both can be true, and that neither one cancels the other out. I set a gift on that table once, the only honest thing anyone had brought to that yard all afternoon. I've spent the months since then learning how to give myself the same kind of honesty, whether or not anyone else is standing there to receive it.